Listen carefully, because something about this moment is not ordinary. There was a second, just a fleeting second, where you could have ignored this. You could have scrolled past. You could have said, "This isn't for me." But you didn't. Something pulled you here. Something deeper than logic, stronger than curiosity, more urgent than coincidence. And now you're reading this not by chance but by design. Because this is a divine interruption. You felt it, haven't you? That strange heaviness lately. That unexplainable shift in your energy. The way your mind feels clouded at random moments. The sudden tiredness that doesn't make sense. The feeling like something is off, but you can't quite explain why. You tried to brush it off. You've told yourself it's stress, or overthinking, or just life being life. But what if it's not? What if that feeling is a signal? A warning that something has already been set into motion, something that began before you even became aware of it. Pause for a moment. Think about last night. Did you feel restless? Did your sleep feel disturbed? Did you wake up feeling like your spirit had been somewhere your body couldn't follow? That's not random. That's not your imagination. That is your spirit reacting to something that happened in the unseen. And now heaven has intervened. This message didn't arrive early, and didn't arrive late. It arrived right on time, because the window to act is already narrowing. There is a reason the urgency feels so intense. There is a reason the title felt impossible to ignore. There is a reason your eyes are still locked on these words right now. Because something was done and it involves you. You were meant to find this before the clock runs out. Before midnight. Before the full effect settles in. Before what was started becomes completed. This is not meant to create fear. No, this is meant to awaken you. Because fear paralyzes, but awareness empowers. And right now, you are being pulled out of spiritual blindness into divine clarity. Archangel Michael does not interrupt without cause. He does not step outside heavenly order without purpose. And if a message like this has reached you, it means one thing. You were not meant to remain unaware. You see, most people go through life completely disconnected from what's happening in the unseen realm. They dismiss intuition. They ignore signs. They silence that inner voice that tries to warn them when something isn't right. But you felt something. That's why you're here. Because even if your mind didn't understand it, your spirit recognized it. And now, the truth is beginning to surface. There is a reason this moment feels different from anything else you've read or heard before. It's because this isn't just information. This is activation. This is the moment where passive observation ends and spiritual awareness begins. You are being called to pay attention, to become alert, to step out of distraction and into discernment. Because what's coming next will reveal why this interruption had to happen now, and why you, specifically, were chosen to receive it. Nothing about this is random. Not the timing. Not the message. Not you. You are here because something has already begun, and heaven refuses to let you face it unprepared. Type "I am aware" in the comments if you feel this message stirring your spirit. Blessing code 1717 is now surrounding you. Listen, because what you are about to hear is not ordinary, and it is not something that happens lightly in the order of heaven. There are laws in the spiritual realm. There are boundaries, ranks, assignments, and divine protocols that even the highest angels do not cross without command. Every movement is calculated. Every message is timed. Every intervention is measured against eternity itself. Loving is done impulsively. Nothing is done out of emotion. Everything is done with precision. And yet something has happened that disrupted that order. Archangel Michael has stepped forward, not in silence, not in observation, but in direct intervention. Do you understand what that means? He is not just any messenger. He is not a whisper in the wind or a distant presence watching from afar. He is a commander, a defender, a warrior, whose very existence is tied to divine protection and spiritual warfare. When he moves, it is because something serious has already begun. When he speaks, it is because silence is no longer an option. And now he is speaking to you. But here is what should stop you in your tracks. This message did not come through the usual channels. It was not scheduled. It was not part of a gradual unfolding. It was not something that could wait for the right moment. No, this was urgent enough that he stepped beyond what is normally permitted. He risked the weight of his own rank to ensure this warning reached you in time. It should tell you everything you need to know about the gravity of what is unfolding. Because beings of that level do not act without consequence. They do not intervene without reason. They do not break formation unless something has already crossed a dangerous line. And so he has. You may not have seen it. You may not have heard it. But in the unseen realm, a line was crossed that required immediate response. The boundary was violated. An action was taken that directly affected you, your energy, your path, your alignment. And when that happened, heaven did not remain passive. Michael was deployed. But this was not just a routine assignment. This was a response that carried urgency, intensity, and risk. Because what was done was not small. It was not harmless. It was not something that could be ignored or allowed to play out without interference. And so he stepped forward. He stepped through the noise. He stepped through the layers that separate the physical from the spiritual. He stepped into your awareness. And he is making something very clear. You were not meant to remain in the dark about this. Think about that. There are countless things that happen in the unseen that never reach human awareness. Countless shifts, movements, and spiritual interactions that go unnoticed. But this was different. This required exposure. This required interruption. This required you to know. Because without awareness, you would remain vulnerable. Without awareness, you would continue as if nothing had happened. Without awareness, what was set in motion could take deeper root, and that could not be allowed. So he took the step, not to frighten you, not to overwhelm you, but to ensure that you are positioned with knowledge before the full weight of what was initiated begins to unfold. You may be wondering right now why would this level of intervention be directed at you specifically? The answer is not random. It is not accidental. It is not because you are weak. It is because you matter in ways you may not fully understand yet. Because something about your life, your path, your presence carries weight in the spiritual realm. Enough weight that actions were taken. Enough weight that attention was drawn. Enough weight that intervention became necessary. And Michael saw it. He saw what was initiated. He saw what it was connected to. He saw where it was trying to lead. And he made a decision. A decision that you needed to know now, not later. That you needed clarity now, not confusion. That you needed awareness before the situation deepened. This is not casual. This is not symbolic. This is direct. You are being addressed because something required immediate correction. And now, the next part of this message will begin to uncover exactly what triggered this level of response, what was done, and why it could not wait. Stay focused. Because what is about to be revealed next is the moment everything starts to make sense. Type "I am protected" in the comments if you receive this message. Blessing code 2222 is now activated. Listen carefully now, because this is where the unseen begins to take form, and what felt like confusion starts to reveal its source. Something was done last night. Not imagined. Not symbolic. Not harmless. Something intentional. And it involved you. There was a moment, while you were unaware, while you were going about your life or resting your body, when your image was taken into a space you were never meant to be part of. A photograph of you. Something that carries your likeness, your presence, your identity, was placed with purpose. Not casually. Not accidentally. Deliberately positioned as a point of focus. Because in the spiritual realm, representation carries connection. Your image is not just an image. It is a reflection of your presence, a symbolic doorway that can be used to direct intention toward you. And that is exactly what happened. A black candle was lit. Pause there for a moment. Because this was not done for light. It was not done for warmth. It was done for direction. The flame was not meant to illuminate a room, but to channel intention. And when that flame rose, it became the focal point of something deeper, something that extended beyond the physical act itself. Words were spoken, not loudly, not in a way that would be heard by others, but in a way that carried intent. And intent, when focused, begins to move in the unseen. It begins to travel. It begins to attach. It begins to seek the target it was directed toward. And that target was you. You may feel a resistance inside you right now, a part of your mind trying to rationalize this, trying to dismiss it as impossible or unrealistic. That is natural, because the physical world trains you to only believe what you can see. But your spirit has already been reacting. That uneasiness, that subtle discomfort, that unexplained heaviness, it did not come from nowhere. Because when that act was performed, it initiated something. Not complete, not final, but initiated. A signal was sent. An attempt was made to create influence, to create interference, to create disruption in your flow, your clarity, your alignment. And this is where you must understand something clearly. Not every act like this carries power on its own. It is not the object. It is not the candle. It is not the photograph alone. It is the intention behind it. It is the focus. It is the direction. And last night, the direction was set toward you. This is why Archangel Michael intervened. Because left unaddressed, intention seeks completion. Left unchallenged, it attempts to settle. Left unnoticed, it tries to root itself in subtle ways, not through immediate chaos, but through gradual influence, through small disruptions, through moments of confusion, through energy shifts that you cannot easily explain but begin to affect your decisions, your emotions, your clarity. And you have already felt the beginning of that. Think about the small changes, the slight delay in your focus, the moments where your energy dipped without reason, the feeling of being slightly out of alignment, even when everything around you seemed normal. That is how it begins. Not loudly, quietly, gradually. But here is what changes everything. It has now been exposed. And exposure interrupts progression. Awareness disrupts intention. The moment you become aware of something that was meant to remain hidden, its ability to move freely begins to weaken. Its influence begins to lose stability. Its direction begins to break apart. That is why this message reached you now. Not after. Not when it would be too late. Now. Because there is still a window. A moment where what was initiated can be interrupted before it attempts to settle deeper. You are not powerless in this. You are not defenseless. And you are not alone. Because the same moment that act was performed was the same moment heaven responded. Archangel Michael saw it. He saw the intention. He saw the direction. He saw the connection being attempted. And he stepped in. Not to allow fear to take hold, but to ensure that you are positioned in awareness before anything else unfolds. This is not the end of the message. This is the unveiling. And what comes next will reveal something even more critical, not just what was done, but who is connected to it, and why it was directed at you in the first place. Stay attentive, because the truth is still unfolding. Type "I break every attack" in the comments if you receive this message. Blessing code 3333 is now activated. As this revelation settles into your spirit, understand this. Every message like this is a seed of light planted in darkness, reaching someone who is silently searching for truth. When you choose to support this mission through PayPal or Super Thanks, you are not giving to a channel. You are sowing into souls who are standing at the edge of awakening just like you are now. The word declares, "Cast your bread upon the waters, for you will find it after many days." And this is that moment where your giving becomes a ripple that heaven multiplies. If you feel that pull inside you, that quiet voice saying this matters, that is your spirit aligning with divine purpose, do not ignore it. Act on it. Let your support become a river that carries truth to those still lost in confusion. Every seed you release will return as clarity, protection, and favor over your life. Step into this moment of obedience and give as you are led. Now listen closely, because this is where the truth becomes uncomfortable, and where your spirit must remain steady even if your emotions begin to react. What was done last night did not come from nowhere. It did not appear out of emptiness. It was not random, and it was not without direction. There was a source. There was a hand behind the action. And here's what you must understand: it is not who you expect. Your mind may immediately try to search for an obvious enemy, someone distant, someone you have already labeled as negative, someone you have already separated from your life. It would be easier to accept. That would be easier to process. That would allow you to place the situation neatly into something familiar. But this is not that. Because what makes this moment so critical is not just what was done, but where it came from. This did not originate from distance. It originated from proximity. From someone who knows you. Someone who has observed you. Someone who understands your patterns, your habits, your energy, your timing. Not completely, not deeply, but enough to form intention. Enough to direct focus. Enough to create connection. This is why it feels unsettling, because the energy behind what happened carries familiarity, and your spirit recognizes familiarity even when your mind resists it. Think carefully now. Have you felt a shift around someone recently? Not something obvious, not something you could easily explain, but something subtle. A change in tone, a difference in presence, a moment where something felt slightly off. Even if everything looked normal on the surface, that feeling was not accidental. Because when intention begins to change, energy follows. And when energy shifts, those who are sensitive begin to feel it before they understand it. You may have dismissed it. You may have told yourself it was nothing. You may have chosen to maintain peace instead of questioning what you sensed. But your spirit noticed. And now, that awareness is being brought forward. This does not mean hatred. This does not mean confrontation. This does not mean immediate action toward anyone. This means clarity. Because you cannot protect what you refuse to acknowledge. and you cannot remain aligned if you continue to ignore what your spirit is trying to show you. The hidden enemy is not always someone who appears hostile. It is not always someone who openly opposes you. Sometimes it is someone who remains close enough to observe, but distant enough to conceal intention. Someone who smiles but does not celebrate. Someone who listens but does not support. Someone who watches but does not uplift. And over time, that silent observation can turn into comparison. Comparison can turn into discomfort. Discomfort can turn into intention. And a dedima lefanjegim into action. That is the progression. And that is why this moment matters. Because what was done did not come from pure strength. It came from misaligned intention. From someone attempting to influence what they do not control. From someone attempting to interfere with what they do not fully understand. And here is what you must hold on to right now. Their action does not define your outcome. Their intention does not override your path. Their focus does not determine your future. But your awareness determines your response. And your response determines how far anything can go. This is why Archangel Michael intervened. Not because you are weak, but because you were unaware of the source. And once the source begins to be revealed, your position changes. You are no longer operating in the dark. You are no longer moving without insight. You are no longer exposed in the same way. Because awareness creates distance, even before physical distance exists. And that distance weakens influence. It interrupts connection. It reduces the ability for intention to settle. You do not need to react emotionally. You do not need to confront immediately. You do not need to prove anything. What you need is to observe, to become still, to pay attention without forcing conclusions. Because clarity does not come through panic. It comes through stillness. And in that stillness, things will begin to reveal themselves. Patterns will become visible. Energy will become clearer. Words will carry different weight. And you will begin to understand without needing confirmation from anyone else. This is the shift that is happening right now. You are moving from confusion into awareness. From assumption into discernment. From passive presence into active observation. And as this continues, what is hidden will not remain hidden for long. Because once light is directed towards something, it cannot stay concealed. This is not the end of the revelation. This is the beginning of understanding the connection behind it. And what comes next will show you how this has already started to affect your life in ways you may not have fully recognized until now. Stay grounded. Stay aware. Because everything is beginning to align into clarity. Type ISE clearly in the comments if you receive this message. Lesson code 4444 is now activated. Now listen carefully, because this is where everything begins to connect, and what once felt random starts to reveal a pattern that has already been unfolding around you. What happened last night did not remain contained in that moment. It did not stay in that space. It did not end when the candle burned down. It initiated movement. And that movement has already begun to ripple into your life. This is the part most people fail to recognize. They expect something loud, something dramatic, something immediate. They expect chaos to appear instantly, something obvious enough that they can point to it and say, "This is the result." But that is not how these things begin. They begin subtly, quietly, almost invisibly. And that is exactly why they can go unnoticed. Think back over the past hours, even the past day. There have been moments that felt slightly different, moments that did not quite align with your usual rhythm. Small disruptions that were easy to dismiss, easy to overlook, easy to explain away as coincidence. But now you must look again. Because those small disruptions are not random. They are indicators. A slight heaviness in your body that did not match your physical condition. A sudden drop in motivation when you were previously focused. A moment where your thoughts felt scattered, where clarity seemed just out of reach. A delay in something that normally flows easily. A subtle emotional shift that came without a clear cause. These are not dramatic events, but they are signals. Because when something is initiated in the unseen, it rarely arrives as a storm. It arrives as a shift in energy, a shift in focus, a shift in alignment. And those shifts, when unnoticed, can begin to stack, to layer, to build into something that feels larger over time. This is how influence attempts to establish itself, not by force, but by subtle interference. And what you are experiencing right now is not the full effect. It is the beginning of an attempt to create imbalance, an attempt to disrupt your natural flow, an attempt to introduce confusion where there was once clarity. And this is why awareness is critical. Because once you recognize the pattern, it can no longer operate in the same way. You may have noticed how your thoughts have been slightly more difficult to organize. How decisions that once felt simple now carry a moment of hesitation. How your energy seems to fluctuate without a clear external reason. How interactions feel just slightly off, even if nothing obvious has changed. This is how it works. It does not take over. It interferes. It nudges. It distorts just enough to create doubt, just enough to create hesitation, just enough to shift your trajectory of left unchecked. But here is what changes everything. You are no longer unaware. The moment you recognize interference, it loses its ability to move unnoticed. The moment you identify a shift, you stop accepting it as normal. The moment you see the pattern, you begin to step outside of it. And that is where your power begins to return. Because what was initiated was not completed. It is in motion, but it is not established. It has begun, but it has not rooted. And that means it can be interrupted. It can be weakened. It can be stopped before it becomes something deeper. But only if you remain aware. Only if you stop dismissing what you feel. Only if you begin to observe your own energy with clarity. This is not about fear. This is about precision. Because when you move with awareness, you do not react emotionally. You respond intentionally. You begin to protect your focus. You begin to guard your energy. You begin to notice when something feels out of alignment and correct it immediately instead of allowing it to linger. This is the shift you are entering now. From passive experience to active awareness. From confusion to clarity. From reaction to control. And as you hold that position, the influence that attempted to take hold begins to weaken. Because it relies on your lack of awareness. It relies on your dismissal. It relies on you continuing as if nothing has changed. But something has changed. And now you see it. Now you feel it. Now you understand that what is happening is not random. And that understanding alone begins to break its momentum. But there is still more to uncover. Because what comes next will explain why this had to happen now. Why timing matters. And why there is a specific window that cannot be ignored. Stay focused. Because you are now at the point where awareness must turn into action. Type "I reclaim my energy" in the comments if you receive this message. Lesson code 5555 is now activated. And now listen with complete focus, because this is where urgency becomes real, and where timing is no longer just a detail, but the defining factor of everything that follows. Here is a window. Not symbolic. Not flexible. a real window of time. And that window is already closing. This is what most people misunderstand about moments like this. They believe that awareness alone is enough, that once something is revealed, it can be addressed at any time, that there is always room to delay, to wait, to process later. But that is not how these situations operate. Because what was initiated last night did not begin without timing. It was done within a specific period, a chosen moment, a calculated alignment where intention was focused, where energy was directed, where action was taken with precision. And when something begins in a defined window, it follows a progression, a cycle, a movement from initiation to establishment, from attempt to influence, from influence to attachment. But here is where everything shifts. That progression is not instant. It moves through phases, and between those phases there is interruption. There is a point where what has started can still be stopped. A point where what is forming can still be broken apart. A point where what is attempting to take hold is not yet rooted deeply enough to sustain itself. That point is now. And that is why the timing matters. Midnight is not just a number on a clock. It is a transition point, a boundary between cycles, a shift from one phase into another. And in that transition, whatever has been initiated seeks to complete its movement into the next stage. This is why the urgency is not exaggerated. It is precise. Because if the window is missed, the nature of what you are dealing with changes. Not because it becomes unstoppable, but because it becomes more established, more layered, more embedded. And what could have been interrupted easily requires more effort to break later. This is why Archangel Michael did not wait. This is why the message did not arrive at a convenient time. This is why you felt pulled to this moment instead of finding it later. Because later would not carry the same advantage. Right now, you are in the interruption phase. Right now, you are in the space where awareness meets opportunity. Right now, you are in the exact moment where what was initiated has not yet stabilized. And that is your position of power. You may feel a sense of pressure rising as you hear this. That is not fear. That is recognition. Your spirit understands timing even when your mind tries to slow it down. Your spirit knows when something requires immediate attention. Your spirit recognizes urgency without needing explanation. And that is what you are feeling now. This is not about panic. This is about precision. Because acting in alignment within the right moment changes the entire outcome. Delay shifts the balance. Attention redirects the flow. Awareness interrupts the progression. But hesitation allows continuation. This is why you cannot treat this as something to revisit later. This is why you cannot push this aside and assume it will remain the same. Because time, in this situation, is not neutral, is active, is moving. And with every passing moment, the window narrows. But here is what you must hold on to. You are still within it. You are not too late. You are not behind. You have not missed the opportunity. You are exactly where you need to be at the exact moment where intervention is still effective. That is why this message reached you now. Not after midnight. Not after the shift. Not after the progression completed. Now, because now you can still act from a position of interruption rather than reaction. Now you can still prevent rather than repair. Now you can still redirect rather than recover. This is the difference between awareness at the right time and awareness that comes too late. And you have been given the right time. So do not minimize this moment. Do not dilute its importance. Do not treat it as optional. Because the urgency you feel is not being created. It is being revealed. and what you do within this window determines how far anything can go beyond it. Stay present. Stay focused. Because the next part will reveal something even more critical: why you were targeted in the first place, and what it is about you that made this necessary. Type IACT and time in the comments if you receive this message. Blessing code 6666 is now activated. Now listen closely, because this is where everything shifts from fear into understanding, from confusion into identity, from questioning into clarity about who you truly are. What happened was not random. What was directed toward you was not accidental. And most importantly, it was not because you are weak. It was because of what you carry. There is something about you that holds weight in the unseen. Something that does not always show itself on the surface. Something that may not even be fully visible in your daily life, but something that exists in your presence, in your energy, in your path. That weight hath been noticed, not just by light, but by opposition. This is where many misunderstand their own lives. They assume that attention, interference, or resistance means something is wrong with them. They assume that difficulty is a sign of weakness or misalignment. But in truth, resistance often reveals the opposite. It reveals value, because nothing attempts to interfere with what holds no significance. Nothing attempts to disrupt what carries no movement. Nothing attempts to redirect what has no direction. And what you experienced is not the result of emptiness. It is the result of presence. You have a presence that moves beyond what is visible. A presence that influences more than you realize. A presence that carries potential, direction, and alignment in ways that extend further than your immediate surroundings. And that presence creates reaction. Think about your life for a moment. There have been times where things seem to shift without explanation. Times where opportunities appeared and then suddenly slowed. Times where your clarity felt strong and then became clouded without a clear external pause. Times where you felt like you were moving forward, only to experience subtle resistance that did not make sense. Those were not isolated moments. They were indicators. Indicators that your path carries movement. Indicators that your direction matters. Indicators that your alignment is not neutral. Because neutrality does not attract attention. But movement does. Your action does. Growth does. And you have been moving, even when you did not fully recognize it. You have been shifting, even when it felt slow. You have been aligning, even when it felt uncertain. And that alignment creates visibility, not just in the physical, but in the unseen. This is why you were targeted. Not because you are vulnerable, but because you are becoming. And becoming changes everything. When someone begins to move into a clearer version of themselves, into stronger awareness, into greater alignment, it creates a shift that cannot go unnoticed. It creates a presence that stands out, even when nothing appears different on the surface. And that presence draws both support and resistance. Support aligns with it. Resistance attempts to interfere with it. But here is what you must understand. Interference does not mean success. Attempt does not mean control. And attention does not mean authority. Because what you carry is not easily overridden, is not easily redirected, is not easily taken, but it can be disrupted if left unguarded. That is why awareness is your protection. That is why clarity is your strength. That is why this message matters. Because once you understand that what happened was not about weakness, you stop reacting from fear. You stop questioning your own stability. You stop wondering if something is wrong with you. And you begin to recognize something much more important. That you are not someone things happen to. You are someone things respond to. That is the shift. And once you hold that understanding, your position changes. You stop moving passively. You stop accepting subtle interference as normal. You stop allowing small disruptions to accumulate without recognition. You begin to stand in your own awareness. You begin to move with intention. You begin to hold your own alignment instead of letting it fluctuate based on external influence. And that is where your strength becomes active. Because strength is not just what you carry. It is what you maintain. It is what you protect. It is what you hold steady even when something attempts to shift it. And right now, you are being called into that position. Not to fight, not to react, but to stand. To stand in awareness. To stand in clarity. To stand in understanding of who you are and what you carry. Because once you stand there, what was directed toward you loses its foundation. It loses its ability to connect. It loses its ability to influence. It loses its direction. And that is how it begins to break. Not through force, but through alignment. This is why you were warned. Because what you carry is worth protecting. And now, you are about to move into the next step where awareness becomes action, and where you begin to actively break what was initiated. Stay present, because this is where everything begins to turn. Type "I stand in my power" in the comments if you receive this message. Blessing code 7777 is now activated. Now listen with full attention, because this is the moment where everything begins to shift from awareness into action, from observation into transformation, from being affected into taking control of what has already begun. Up until now, you have been shown what happened, where it came from, and why it was directed toward you. You have been brought into clarity. You have been moved out of confusion. But clarity alone is not the final step. It is the doorway. And what you do after stepping through that doorway determines everything that follows. Because breaking what was initiated does not begin outside of you. It begins within you. This is where many people misunderstand the process. They believe that something external must be done first, that there must be a physical action, a visible step, something they can point to as the beginning of change. But the truth is deeper than that. The first break does not happen in the external. It happens in your alignment. It happens in your decision. It happens in the moment you stop allowing what was directed toward you to remain unchallenged within your own space. Because what was initiated seeks connection. It seeks a place to settle. It seeks a point of alignment where it can begin to influence. And that point is not your environment. It is your state, your focus, your internal position. This is why the first step is release. Not release of fear, but release of acceptance. Because even without realizing it, when something begins to affect you subtly, there is a part of you that starts to adjust to it. A part of you that begins to accept small shifts as normal. A part of you that allows slight imbalance to remain because it is not strong enough to demand immediate correction. That is where it finds space. That is where it begins to anchor. And that is exactly what must be broken first. You must make a decision, not outwardly, but inwardly, that what was initiated has no place within you. That it does not belong in your energy. That it does not belong in your thoughts. That it does not belong in your direction. This is not about saying words. This is about holding a position. A firm, clear, unshaken position. Because once you establish that internally, everything else begins to shift. Your awareness sharpens. Your sensitivity increases. Your ability to detect even the smallest misalignment becomes stronger. And what was attempting to move quietly begins to encounter resistance. Real resistance. Not forced. Not reactive. but grounded, stable, immovable. This is the first break, and it is the most important one, because without it, anything external becomes temporary, but with it, everything that follows becomes effective. You may feel something changing even as you hear this. A shift in your posture, a strengthening in your presence, a clarity that was not there before. That is not imagination. That is alignment returning. Because the moment you stop allowing something to exist within you, it loses its entry point. It loses its pathway. It loses its ability to connect. And this is where the process of breaking truly begins. Not through force, but through refusal. Refusal to let what was directed toward you settle into your space. Refusal to allow subtle interference to become your normal. Refusal to continue moving as if nothing has changed. This is where your control begins. And this is where everything that was initiated starts to weaken. Because what cannot connect cannot grow. What cannot anchor cannot remain. And what cannot remain eventually dissolves. But you must hold that position. Not for a moment. Not briefly. But consistently. Because consistency is what stabilizes your alignment. It is what reinforces your position. It is what ensures that nothing can re-enter once it has been pushed out. This is not complicated, but it is intentional, and it requires you to remain present, to remain aware, to remain in control of your own state, because that is where your true strength lies, not in reacting to what was done, but in controlling what is allowed to exist within you moving forward. This is the first step, and it changes everything. Because once this is established, the next step becomes clear. What must be fully severed, what must be removed completely, and what cannot be carried forward any longer. Stay focused, because you are now in the process of breaking what was started, and the next step will take it even further. Type "I release all that is not mine" in the comments if you receive this message. Blessing code 8888 is now activated. As you stand in this moment of release, understand that every truth you receive is not meant to stop with you, but to flow through you into the lives of others who are still searching for clarity. When you choose to support this mission through PayPal or Super Thanks, you are not simply giving. You are sowing light into places where confusion still holds power. The word speaks, "Give, and it shall be given unto you." And this is not a distant promise. It is a living exchange unfolding even now. If you feel the pull within you to act, that is your spirit aligning with purpose, calling you to become part of something greater than yourself. Let your seed become a stream that carries truth, protection, and awakening to those who have not yet reached this moment. Do not hesitate when you feel that call. Step into it. Release your offering and watch how it returns to you in clarity, strength, and divine alignment. And now listen with complete stillness, because this is where the process deepens, where what has been identified must now be separated, and where you are called to release what can no longer remain connected to you. What was initiated did not attempt to attach randomly. It followed a pathway, a Ganevian, a point of access, and that point is not always something external. It is often something already present, something already familiar, something already allowed to exist within your space, your thoughts, your patterns, or your emotional alignment. This is why breaking what was started is not only about rejecting what came from outside. It is also about recognizing what inside of you may still be linked to it. Because connection does not happen without alignment. Even the smallest point of alignment can act as an opening, a doorway, a bridge. And once that bridge exists, influence attempts to travel across it. This is why severing is necessary, not partially, Not temporarily, but completely. There are things you have carried that no longer belong to your current alignment. Thoughts that were formed in past moments but no longer serve your present clarity. Emotional ties that were built through familiarity but now create subtle imbalance. Attachments that once felt normal but now hold you in patterns you are meant to move beyond. These are the ties, and they are not always obvious. They do not always appear as something negative. Sometimes they appear as comfort, as habit, as something you have become used to carrying without questioning. But comfort does not always mean alignment, and familiarity does not always mean it should remain. You are being called now to look deeper, to observe not just what happened externally, but what remains internally that may still be connected to it. Because what you continue to hold continues to hold a place within you. And anything that holds a place within you can be used as a point of connection. This is why release must go further than awareness. It must move into separation. You may feel resistance as you hear this. A hesitation. A questioning of what exactly needs to be let go. That is natural. Because the mind seeks certainty. It wants clear definitions. It wants to label and identify everything immediately. But this process does not begin with certainty. It begins with honesty. You already know where something feels slightly out of alignment. You already recognize where something has been tolerated instead of addressed. You already sense where something has remained even though it no longer fully fits your current state. That is where you begin. Not by forcing answers, but by acknowledging what you already feel. Because your awareness is not incomplete. It has simply been unspoken. And now, it is being brought forward. Severing is not about force. It is about decision. A clear, internal decision that what no longer aligns will not be carried forward. That what creates subtle imbalance will not be maintained. That what holds even the smallest connection to misalignment will be released completely. This is not loss. This is refinement. Because when something is removed that no longer belongs, what remains becomes stronger, clearer, more stable, and less accessible to interference. This is where your alignment becomes protected. Not because you build walls, but because you remove pathways. You eliminate the bridges that allow unwanted influence to reach you. You close the openings that were never meant to remain. And once those pathways are gone, what was attempting to connect has nowhere to go. It cannot settle. It cannot attach. It cannot continue. This is how the process moves forward. Not through reaction, but through separation. And this separation is not always visible to others. It is not always something that needs to be explained or expressed outwardly. It is something you hold internally. A shift in what you allow. A shift in what you carry. A shift in what you continue to give space to. And once that shift happens, everything else begins to follow. Your clarity strengthens. Your presence stabilizes. Your alignment holds. And what was initiated loses its final points of connection. This is the step that completes the break. Because without connection, nothing can remain. Without alignment, nothing can attach. Without access, nothing can influence. You are now moving into a position where what was started cannot continue. And this is where protection begins to activate in a deeper way. Not just through awareness, but through established alignment that cannot be easily shifted. Stay grounded in this moment, because what comes next will reveal how that protection surrounds you, how it stabilizes you, and how everything that was meant to affect you begins to reverse. Type ICUT all negative ties in the comments if you receive this message. Blessing code 9999 is now activated. Now listen carefully, because this is the moment where everything begins to stabilize, where what felt uncertain becomes anchored, and where you step fully into the protection that has already been moving around you from the very beginning. You were never unprotected. You were never exposed in the way it may have felt, and you were never left to face this alone. From the moment that action was initiated, from the exact second that intention was directed toward you, something else was activated simultaneously. Not after, not later, at the same time. Protection. Not passive observation. Not distant awareness. Active, immediate, intentional protection. This is what you must understand now, because without this understanding, you may continue to feel like you were at risk, like something had the ability to overpower you, like something was allowed to move freely without resistance. But that is not what happened. The moment you became a target, you also became covered. And that covering is not symbolic. It is structured. It is precise. It is maintained. Archangel Michael does not only warn, he guards, he positions, he stands between. This is his role. And once he stepped forward, once he intervened, once awareness was brought to you, that protection did not remain external. It extended to you. It surrounded you. It aligned with you. This is what changes everything. Because protection is not just something placed around you. It is something you step into. Something you align with. Something you maintain through your awareness, your clarity, and your position. This is why everything you have done so far matters. Every moment of awareness. Every decision to release. Every act of severing what no longer belongs. Each of those steps has strengthened the protection around you, not created it, strengthened it, because the protection was already there, but now it is reinforced, stabilized, activated at a deeper level. You may begin to feel a difference now, a sense of steadiness where there was uncertainty, a clarity where there was confusion, a calm presence where there was subtle tension. That is not coincidence. That is alignment with protection. Because when you step into awareness, you step into your covering fully. You begin to operate within it instead of outside of it. And once you are within it, what was directed toward you cannot reach you in the same way. It cannot connect. It cannot attach. It cannot influence. Because there is now a boundary. A real boundary, not visible, but effective. This is what Michael's shield represents. Not a barrier that isolates you, but a field that stabilizes you. A presence that ensures that what is not aligned with you cannot enter your space without resistance. And right now, the shield is active, fully active, not partial, not conditional, but responsive to your position. This is why your alignment matters. Because protection responds to alignment. The more stable you are, the stronger it becomes. The more aware you are, the more precise it operates. The more grounded you remain, the less space exists for anything to interfere. This is how protection functions. Not by removing everything from around you, but by ensuring that nothing can affect you without being met with resistance first. And that resistance is now in place. You are no longer in the same position you were before this message. You are no longer moving without awareness. You are no longer open in the same way. You are now covered, aligned, and stabilized. And that changes the outcome completely. Because what was initiated expected you to remain unaware. It expected you to continue without recognizing what was happening. It expected to move without resistance. But now that expectation has been broken. Because you are aware, you are aligned, and you are protected. This is the turning point, the moment where everything shifts from being influenced to being defended, from being targeted to being shielded, from being affected to being stabilized. And as you remain in this position, what was initiated begins to lose its momentum completely. It begins to weaken, to fade, to dissolve, because it no longer has access. It no longer has connection. It no longer has a pathway. This is how protection works. Not by reacting after something happens, but by preventing it from continuing. And that is exactly what is happening now. Stay in this awareness. Stay in this alignment. Because what comes next will reveal the final shift, the reversal, and how everything that was meant to affect you begins to turn in your favor. Type "I am divinely protected" in the comments if you receive this message. Blessing code 1010 is now activated. And now listen closely, because this is where everything that was said against you begins to turn, where what was meant to weaken you begins to lose direction, and where the outcome shifts in a way that was not expected by what initiated it. Because nothing that was started can continue once it has been fully exposed, interrupted, and disconnected. And you have now reached that point. What was initiated has lost its pathway. What was directed has lost its connection. What attempted to settle has found no place to remain. And when something loses all three, it does not continue forward. It begins to reverse. This is what you are stepping into now. Not just protection, not just stability, but reversal. The moment a negative intention cannot complete its movement, it does not simply disappear without effect. It collapses. It breaks apart. And in that collapse, the energy that was directed outward begins to lose structure, to lose focus, to lose the very alignment that allowed it to move in the first place. This is why what follows is not neutral. It is corrective. Because the same clarity that stopped it from reaching you begins to redirect its movement away from you. This is where you may begin to notice shifts. Not dramatic at first, but precise. Your clarity returns. Your thoughts stabilize. Your energy begins to feel consistent again. What felt scattered begins to align. What felt delayed begins to move again. What felt uncertain begins to become clear. These are not random improvements. They are indicators of reversal. Because when interference is removed, your natural state reestablishes itself. Your alignment returns to its original position. Your direction becomes clear again. And once that happens, movement resumes. This is what you will begin to experience. A sense of forward motion that was not present before. A restoration of focus that allows you to act without hesitation. A return of clarity that removes the subtle confusion that was beginning to form. This is the first phase of reversal. The restoration of what is yours. Because nothing that belongs to you was taken. It was only interrupted. And once the interruption is removed, what belongs to you continues its path. This is why you must not question the process. Do not look for confirmation in dramatic signs. Do not expect something loud. Pay attention to the subtle shifts, the quiet realignments, the moments where things feel right again. Because that is how reversal begins. Steady, accurate, unmistakable once you recognize it. And as this continues, something else happens. What was directed toward you loses its purpose. It no longer has a target. It no longer has alignment. It no longer has the structure it was built upon. And when something loses its purpose, it collapses completely. This is the second phase of reversal. The dissolution of what was initiated. It does not remain active. It does not continue to attempt. It breaks apart. Because without connection, it cannot exist in the same way. And this is why you do not need to fear what was done. Because what was done has already been interrupted. And what hath been interrupted cannot complete its intended outcome. This is the shift from uncertainty, from questioning to understanding, from reaction to control. You are no longer in a position of being affected. You are now in a position of observing the reversal. And this is where your role changes again. You do not chase the process. You do not force the outcome. You remain aligned. You maintain your clarity. You hold your position. Because consistency is what ensures that the reversal completes fully, not partially, not temporarily, but completely. This is why your awareness must remain active, not because something is still affecting you, but because your alignment must remain stable, because stability is what locks in the reversal. And once it is locked in, nothing that was initiated can return in the same way. This is the completion point, the moment where what was attempted no longer has any effect on your path, where your direction continues without interruption, where your clarity remains intact, and where your position is no longer vulnerable to the same kind of influence. This is where you are moving now, into full restoration, into stable alignment, into a state where what was done becomes irrelevant to your forward movement. And this is not temporary. This is established. Because what has been broken at its root does not reattach easily, especially when awareness remains, especially when alignment is maintained, especially when you continue to stand in the position you have now reached. This is the reversal, and it is already in motion. Stay steady, because the final part will bring everything together and will call you into your next position, not just protected, not just restored, but fully established in your authority moving forward. Type I receive the reversal in the comments if you receive this message. Blessing code 1111 is now activated. Now listen with everything within you, because this is the final moment, the closing of this message, and the opening of your next position. This is not where the story ends. This is where your authority begins. Everything that needed to be revealed has now been revealed. You have seen what was hidden. You have understood what was initiated. You have stepped through awareness, release, severing, protection, and now reversal. But none of this was given to you just so you could return to how things were before. You are not meant to go back. You are meant to rise. Because once you see clearly, you cannot unsee. Once you become aware, you cannot return to unawareness. Once you step into alignment, you cannot continue to live in passive acceptance. This is the shift that defines everything from this moment forward. You are no longer someone who moves without understanding. You are no longer someone who ignores subtle shifts. You are no longer someone who allows things to exist in your space without questioning their alignment. You are now someone who sees, who recognizes, who responds with precision instead of reaction. And that is what changes your position permanently. This is the final warning, not because something is still coming, but because you must not fall back into old patterns of dismissal. What has been broken will remain broken only if you maintain the position you have now reached. If you return to passive awareness, if you begin to ignore your own clarity, if you allow subtle misalignment to go unchecked again, you reopen pathways that were just closed. This is not about fear. This is about responsibility. Because now you know. Now you understand. Now you carry awareness that cannot be undone. And with that awareness comes authority. Authority over what you allow. Authority over what you carry. Authority over what you accept into your space. This is your new position. Not reactive, not defensive, but established, grounded, Archangel. You do not need to search for confirmation anymore. You do not need to question every feeling. You do not need to doubt your own awareness. Because what you have just moved through has sharpened you. It has strengthened your perception. It has stabilized your alignment. And from this point forward, you move differently. You observe before you absorb. You recognize before you react. You maintain your position instead of adjusting to everything around you. This is how you remain protected. This is how you remain clear. This is how you remain in control of your own path. Because nothing external holds more power than your internal alignment once it is fully established. And now yours is established. This is the rise. Not loud, not forced, but undeniable. A quiet strength that does not need validation. A steady awareness that does not need explanation. A presence that cannot be easily influenced or redirected. This is what you step into now. And this is what you must maintain. Because the moment you hold this position consistently, everything that once attempted to affect you becomes irrelevant. Not because it no longer exists, but because it no longer has access. And without access, nothing can influence you. This is your final instruction. Stay aware. Stay aligned. Stay grounded in what you now understand. Because this is not a temporary state. This is your new standard. And as long as you hold it, nothing that was meant to disrupt you will ever find its way back into your space again. This is not the end. This is your beginning. Type "I rise in authority" in the comments if you receive this message. Blessing code 1212 is now activated. As you stand in this new level of authority, understand that what you have received is not just for you. It is meant to flow into the lives of others who are still walking in confusion, still searching for clarity, still waiting for a moment like this. When you give through PayPal or Super Thanks, you are not supporting a platform. You are igniting a chain of awakening that reaches souls across the world. The word speaks, "Give, and it shall be given unto you." Pressed down, shaken together, and running over. And this is not a distant promise. It is a living exchange activated through obedience. If you feel that pull right now, that inner voice saying this must continue, that is your moment. Say within yourself, "I am part of this mission," and act on it. Let your seed become light. Let it become fire. Let it become a river that carries truth where darkness once ruled. Release it now, without hesitation, and step into the blessing that follows obedience.